Hi everyone, welcome, hello, assalamu alaikum. May peace be with you on this lovely kind of summery afternoon slash evening as we approach the end of this day. I'm Barhan. I'm your chair for today. I am a master's law student currently, and I have been told that today we are going to be talking about an organization called Standing Together. An organization that seems to be growing in its influence currently in the world right now, especially with regards to what is currently happening in Gaza and Palestine. Today we have two wonderful speakers, and I will just give each one of you a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves, and then we can move forward with the session. So if either, I think, Ronnie, would you like to go first?
Oh, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Ronnie. I'm an Israeli dissident, opposed to pretty much everything the Zionist state is about. I have been active throughout the years as conscientious objector, BDS activist. We founded a group of conscientious Israelis who support the Palestinian campaign for boycott, divestment, sanctions, and more recently also involved with Palestine Action. As you can see with the shirt, I take pride in actually smashing up the Elbit Systems headquarters in Bristol. Other than that, obviously focusing most of my time on challenging the Zionist propaganda, which usually comes from the so-called left, the so-called liberal Zionist aspect of Zionism, which is what we are here to discuss today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And David, would you like to go next?
Thank you for having me. So I'm David Miller. I used to be Professor of Sociology, Political Sociology at the University of Bristol until they sacked me in October 2021, and then I took them to court, and in February last year, was it, we won a victory which established that anti-Zionist views were worthy of protection in a democratic society. I spend most of my time now, having been sacked, researching the Zionist movement, and in particular, of course, that involves looking, at least in part of my work, at the currents that Ronnie is talking about, the left, liberal Zionists, those elements of the Zionist movement which appear to be sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause, but which are doing this for bad faith reasons, to try and destroy or divide or demobilize the actual Palestine solidarity movement, and those of us who believe in dismantling the Zionist entity and indeed dismantling the Zionist movement all around the world, which I think is what is required.
Thank you so much. Before we dive straight into the questions, I have been told to read out a statement made by Majd Asadi, who was meant to be attending today, but due to unforeseen circumstances cannot do so. And this is a really interesting statement he has made, which I'm just going to read out. A call to end violence without dismantling the mechanisms of oppression that produce it is, in practice, a call for silence, not an end to the killing. It is impossible to achieve the values that you, I, and many others fight for within this system. And this is not about the government or the right or Ben Gvir or Netanyahu. They are the product of this system. Moreover, asking the oppressed to compromise while living under occupation, siege, and oppression is a moral failure. They are not fighting to dominate, but to survive. They have lost everything they had. So what exactly are they expected to compromise on? The idea of let's compromise now and fight for justice later has failed repeatedly. Every period of calm has been used to deepen control, not to make concessions. There is no shortage of examples for that. And when Hamas and the State of Israel are compared as equal parties blocking a solution, a profound difference is blurred between a strong state and an oppressed people among whom armed organizations emerge out of hopelessness. Armed groups like Hamas didn't arise in a vacuum. They are a direct result of ongoing political failure, partly initiated by Israel. Since Oslo, every Palestinian initiative, popular, diplomatic, or political, has been sidelined, thwarted, or violently suppressed. Israel has strengthened the Palestinian division, deliberately weakened the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and at the same time maintained full control over the territory, expanding settlements, imposing siege, and carrying out creeping annexation. When there is no political horizon, when the Palestinian leadership is ineffective because it has been dulled and worn down, and when every form of non-violent resistance is seen as a threat, a vacuum is created. And that vacuum is filled by armed organizations. This is the result of the absence of alternatives, sometimes even the result of policy. Otherwise, Hamas or any other organization would not have existed. The prolonged neglect of the refugee camps, which is neglect of recognition and historical justice, naturally leads to an explosion like the one we are witnessing today. So a lot of food for thought there. And I appreciate that he has sent this in for us to reflect on. So now I'm going to move on to the questions. They are relatively straightforward, around 15 minutes for each question. Just Ronnie and David, you can discuss amongst yourselves how you want to answer those. Or actually, I can either pose a question to each one of you. We can alternate, so we have 4 questions altogether. So the first question is, who are they and what do they do? What is this Standing Together organization? So it's up to either of you how you want to take this question forward.
Ronnie is best on this one, I think.
I would ask David to start just because I see that my internet is a little shaky. So please, can you take this first and I will join you.
Okay, well, I mean, Ronnie will tell you much more in depth about this organization. He is much more of an expert on this organization than I am. But if you consult its website, you can see perfectly clearly what's going on here. If you read what it says, very carefully. I mean, first of all, to say on its website, there's not really a lot of information there. There is some information about who works there, some information about its aims and about a kind of FAQ section. But when you read that, you see that it's calling for opposition to the occupation. Now, what they mean by the occupation, of course, is the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. They, I think, presumably, just like other liberal Zionist organizations, don't even mean to include the Golan Heights or indeed the parts of Lebanon which are still occupied, etc. And of course, let's remember Syria. But the other thing which is even more important, I think, is that they say on their website that they're a movement, a grassroots movement, bringing together Israeli citizens to fight for justice. Now, what that means, of course, is Israeli Jews and what's called Israeli Arabs, i.e. Palestinians, but it doesn't want to have anything to do with the Palestinians who have been forced out into Gaza, forced out into the West Bank, who many of whom came, of course, from what's now called 48 Israel, or Palestine, if you like. So it doesn't have any conception that it's about replacing the state of Israel with a Palestinian state. It only has a conception of reforming Israel. And that, of course, is a recipe for the continuation of the Zionist entity, the continuation of racism, of genocide, and of the settler colonial entity, and of course no recipe for justice at all. Now, maybe I say a few words about how this fits into the wider strategy. Now, if you look at as I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, maybe longer, at the Zionist movement, the Zionist movement has a formal structure. It's headed by the World Zionist Organization, and they have a number of other organizations associated with that, which are to do with stealing the land, providing the money to steal the land, and also bringing settlers to settle on the stolen land and providing money for that too. And those organizations are all around the world, and then they have a whole series of other groups, often called the Israel Lobby, or lobby groups in relation to occupied Palestine. Now, those organizations, quite often you can see the direct role of the Zionist movement in these organizations, even when they are pretending to be liberal, pretending to be interested in dialogue or understanding. So the classic example, of course, is the interfaith organizations, where they have Zionists who represent themselves as just Jews, who are having lovely discussions with Muslims to try and understand better the problems that there might be between Muslims and Jews in the society, whether it's in the UK or the US or elsewhere. Now, of course, what that is an attempt to do is to undermine the Muslims in the UK or wherever else, in order that they are less likely to criticize Zionism and be hostile to Zionism. But you can tell that this is the Zionist movement activity because representatives from the Zionist movement are involved in the organization. Now, a slightly more sophisticated way of doing this is not to have people from the Zionist movement, people who say that they're critics of the Zionist movement. Maybe they say they're critics of Zionism. Maybe if you press them a little bit, you'll find out they're Zionists, but they're not formally part of the well-known Zionist organizations, the Board of Deputies or BICOM or the JNF or any of those organizations. And so that's where it's more sophisticated. There's another organization a bit like this in Scotland called the Balfour Project, just now changed its name to the Britain-Palestine Project. And it's the same. It doesn't come from a Zionist movement background. So these are slightly more sophisticated means for Zionists to effectively get into our movements and say, actually, we need, in order to sort this out, the best chance of sorting this out is if people work together across the divide, etc., etc. Just exactly the same kind of argument which was made in relation to the conflict in Ireland, which of course is where I first started to do research when I was a lot younger than I am now. So this is a strategy. It's a strategy which is adopted by Zionists, but not necessarily by the formal Zionist movement. And that's why perhaps it's harder to see the fact that it's a strategy and is intended to undermine, disorient, and demobilize us.
Yes, I will add that even before going into the technicalities, the specifics about standing together, there are these two elements. One is the element of normalization that is possibly the least understood aspect when we talk about the BDS discourse. And secondly is the liberal Zionist propaganda, which has to do with the first. So the issue of normalization is defined pretty much like so. It is any joint activity between Israelis and Palestinians, basically between the privileged and the underprivileged groups, can only be done if it is not an act of normalization. It can only be done given two conditions. One is that we do not accept the current situation, the current status quo, as normal or legitimate, so that we do not normalize the abnormal, we do not legitimize the illegitimate. And secondly, that we accept that the oppressed people have rights under international law and so on. This is all. It sounds pretty straightforward. And if we do that, if we do not accept the current status quo, and we do accept that those people who are oppressed, subjugated, and terrorized have the right to oppose that system of oppression, domination, and terror, then we don't even have to take a direct action like, let alone Palestinian action, if not even, go on a demonstration. We just have to accept the rights under international law. If we accept the rights, we don't accept the normality, then this will not be an act of normalization. Then we can have homeless for peace and football for peace and all of that. But usually, all of these actions that are done between Israelis and Palestinians are done in order to have something kind of a dialogue outside of the conflict, away from the conflict, away from actually discussing the real issues, which is nice on a one-on-one level, but it doesn't change the situation. To change the political system of oppression, domination, and terror, we have to challenge that system and hopefully abolish it altogether. So this is about normalization in a nutshell. And standing together has been deemed to be a normalization organization by PACBI, Palestinian Academic Cultural Boycott Initiative. And basically on the BDS movement website and on many other places, you will see clear statements against standing together, saying that, I can give you the direct quote, the title is Staying Together, Serving Apartheid Israel's Propaganda. Okay, they are clearly regarded as a normalization organization. The other thing is understanding what is liberal Zionist propaganda. And exactly as David mentioned before, the propaganda, actually the effective form of propaganda, is not that which makes up the facts. They do give you some of the facts, but they kind of cover it, give you a really nice packaging, okay? Put it in a whole other narrative, which is what Haaretz newspaper is all about, for example. If you want to get the facts from a Haaretz article, no problem. Just don't read a single word of political analysis because it's all crap. It's all propaganda. What do I mean by that? Whenever they use terms like Israeli democracy, saving Israeli democracy, fighting the occupation, the settlement, but they only speak about the occupation, the minor occupation of 67. They only speak about the settlements of 67. They don't speak about the actual occupation and apartheid and the actual settlement of 48. So that's some noise. When we talk about the Israeli left, which I would argue that doesn't exist and never existed, there's a handful of anti-Zionists, that's pretty much it. The rest are different shades of Zionism. When they speak about, I mean, there's all these things. Okay, so basically, in a nutshell, it's all about, do we focus the discussion on 48 or 67? 67 is the latest, or not even the latest, in a long list of Israeli crimes. But it is not the only issue. If we speak about the occupation, the brutal occupation of 67, in the context of the greater scheme of things, that is fine. That is more than needed. But if we only focus at 67 in order to legitimize the rest, and this is what Standing Together and all the other liberal Zionists do, then that is a problem. When we say, oh, the settlements, and we mean those in the West Bank, but we don't question the legitimacy of the settlements on top of Jaffa and Haifa and Akka. Okay, when we point the finger at Netanyahu, which is exactly what Standing Together do, they point the finger at what they call the far right and so on, and the Netanyahu government and so on, which obviously are awful. There's no question about it. But they do this in order to legitimize their counterparts, and they are affiliated with political parties that actually don't stand for anything that is very different than what Netanyahu stands for. They just use a different language. So the two things, normalization and the propaganda language, go hand in hand. And Stand Together is kind of like a nice package for all of that.
Okay, thank you. That was a very good, comprehensive discussion, and it's very nuanced as well. It just shows us how easily it is to manipulate the general population into thinking that there are certain organizations have sympathies to the Palestinian cause by engaging with that community. I find that very interesting. Also, so witnessing that when I was at university. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to say that there will be a Q&A at the end of this session. So please do use the question and answer button, I think is the text box at the end, to send your questions in. All right, so we will now move on to the next question, which is, who funds Standing Together and what do they gain from it? So I think I was told that David could answer this question quite well, but we can just do it again, just how we did the first question.
So I'll start then. First of all, Standing Together initially was funded by two German organizations that are affiliated with German political parties, which are Zionist parties. One is the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, which is the let's say the public relations wing of Die Linke, the left, and which is the Zionist party in Germany, and the other is, I think, the Greens, which have their organization that's funded. But the ongoing funding, it seems to be to a large extent, is by the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund. So all of these are very Zionist organizations. The New Israel Fund is all about that discourse of lies that I mentioned a moment ago. They have, for example, promoted Standing Together, and they do promote them right now. They were on a tour in the US just recently, and the vice president of external relations or something like that of New Israel Fund, Libby Lenkinsky, who basically dedicates her time to this whitewashing of, kind of like giving a nice pro-Palestinian veneer to all these liberal Zionist organizations. And so she was hosting two members of Standing Together on this tour in the US with quite a lot of public perception. And so they're working hand in hand with New Israel Fund, both financially and also to promote their cause. Now, at the same time, Standing Together, which I will have to explain what they are actually, they have also organized public events, political events, because they are affiliated also with a political party, we have to mention, which is Hadash Party, Jabba. But they organized these events, protests, mostly in Tel Aviv, not only, and they invite all these different political partners of theirs, which are basically the whole spectrum of those politicians, from the liberal Zionists spectrum, including Tzipi Livni. Tzipi Livni, who is regarded or was regarded as the leader of the opposition, but she's also a board member of Elbit Systems. She's also a war criminal. She was sought after her involvement in the war crimes of 2008 in Gaza. This is the reason why the UK changed the laws about universal jurisdiction, exactly in order to allow for Tzipi Livni specifically and her colleagues, her fellow war criminals, to visit the UK. And then she committed another massacre in Gaza in 2014. And she is promoted, maybe not explicitly by Standing Together, but kind of working hand in hand. But she's promoted by the US World Fund along with Standing Together. So this is kind of how it works. I know I'm saying not explicitly because Tzipi Livni, when she went to one of those protests that were organized by Standing Together, she tweeted something kind of silly and she got a bit of backlash for it because she said, I don't know who is organizing the demonstration, but I invite you all to come. This was her tweet. And it was kind of silly because obviously she knows they are kind of, but there are stronger ties that I can talk about Standing Together. But kind of in one line, what is Standing Together? It is supposedly a group of what they call Jews and Arabs who work together for peace and dialogue and ending of the occupation. They do use the word occupation to their credit. When they say occupation, they mean the occupation of 67, but they don't use any of the other terminologies that we would use, like apartheid, like genocide, like ethnic cleansing, like all of that. They cater to basically all those liberal Zionists that don't want this type of terminology.
So, I mean, the New Israel Fund is an interest. Oh, are you there again, Ronnie?
You back?
Yes, please take it. I'll try. You know, whenever I get online, something happens. I don't want to say it's a conspiracy, but something happens.
You carry on.
So I'm not quite sure where we left off, but basically there are strong. The discourse is that of dialogue, peace, saying occupation, but not saying apartheid, not saying genocide, not saying all of that. At the same time, they have strong political ties, not explicit, but implicitly, it's very clear that they have strong political ties with Fadash Party, which is Ayman Odeh's party, which is a party that in itself will only speak about the occupation, but does not support BDS, does not explicitly support the right of return. Actually, that political party, when they were part of the joint list, along with other Palestinian parties in the Israeli Knesset, they had some short statement in their platform about the right of return of Palestinian refugees. When they split from the joint list, they removed that from their political platform. So this is kind of who we're dealing with. Those are people who promote two states. They only focus on challenging the occupation of 67, challenging Netanyahu's government. At the same time, they are promoting those people like from Ayman Odeh and the others. They have actually promoted Benny Gantz as a competitor to Netanyahu just not too long ago. You know, Benny Gantz, who is a war criminal himself. He was an ally, according to them. You know, this is kind of the type of terminology. Now, maybe finally, in one word, when I hear from you read the statement from Majd, who was part of Standing Together for a while, and I published a statement by him, kind of a testimony from within, when he was still part of that group, and he raised some questions. And one thing, for example, that he mentioned is that when Standing Together representatives were in the U.S., they would approach people demonstrating and chanting "Free Palestine," and they would challenge that, and they would criticize the chant "Free Palestine" because they said, but it's not only Palestine, it's also Israel. So saying "Free Palestine" it's not okay according to them. This is kind of the type of thinking because they like to.
I mean, so I mean, there was a demonstration in Bristol just the other week, and there were people from I don't know if they were members of Standing Together, but they were giving out Standing Together leaflets at the demonstration. And this is very familiar to us from the tactics of other liberal Zionist or organizations like, for example, Yachad, and also an organization like Namod, which has Zionists, non-Zionists, whatever that is, and anti-Zionists apparently involved. And they're all part of a similar sort of set of activities, which is about undermining and blurring and demobilizing the movement. Now, it's important, I think, to recognize that this is an ecosystem. So it's not just this organization standing together and doing all the things that Ronnie said, and of course they object to other slogans like, you know, from the river to the sea, and in fact anything you might say, because of course they're interested in freeing Israel from oppression, where of course Israel is the oppression. This is an ecosystem. Now, Ronnie mentioned Die Linke, which of course is the German left party that came out of the formation of the left from West Germany and the remnants of the Communist Party from East Germany, which it has become very much a Zionist party, and it has a foundation. All political parties above a certain level in Germany have foundations associated with them, which are in receipt of public money, including sometimes money from the foreign office. So they are there to pursue political projects that the party approves of, but also to take on projects which the foreign ministry of Germany is interested in. That's of course standing together is one of them. They do quite a number of these kinds of things, but they also fund, of course, for example, let's remember Novara Media in the UK, and that is an indication really of that Novara Media is part of this ecosystem, right? Even if it might not want you to say that or think that they are part of the same ecosystem, which is about undermining and demobilizing our movements. So that's an interesting thing, and you can look at who else Die Linke and in fact the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung or Foundation Fund as well. Now the other organization that Ronnie mentioned is the New Israel Fund. Now this is a really very important and misunderstood and not widely known about organization. And it's funded by a whole series of Zionist organizations, foundations, family foundations in the normal way of these things. So, for example, I've been looking recently at the Scottish Zionist movement, and there's perhaps the oldest Zionist family who are core to setting up the Scottish Zionist movement were a family called the Goldbergs, and they had a department store in Edinburgh and Glasgow, which had a fantastic menagerie on the roof. I used to go there as a kid. And they have been strongly involved in funding, yes, the New Israel Fund, but also some of the other organizations that the New Israel Fund funds, like, for example, Yachad, which is the liberal Zionist organization I mentioned. They also fund civil rights and human rights organizations inside 48 Israel. And these are organizations sometimes which we on the left think are good. So B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, the NCRI, and these organizations, quite a lot of them are funded directly by the New Israel Fund. So it's instructive to look at what's going on here. This is an attempt to say that you can manage the human rights abuses of the state of Israel, and it can be reformed. I mean, of course, the lesson of this genocide, and as every day progresses, the lesson, more and more people come to this lesson. The lesson is there is no reform of the state of Israel. There is no reform of the Zionist entity. It has to be dismantled. It has to be removed from the pages of history, as the former president of Iran once controversially said some years ago. Now, people used to say, throw their hands up at horror and say, this means the genocide of the Jews. No, it doesn't. It means the dismantling of the state. Yes, the apartheid system, but actually the genocidal settler colonial system, which occupies all of Palestine, needs to be dismantled, and there needs to be one state, a state of Palestine. And that's the reality. And all of these organizations, some of which, participate in our movements, and some of which can say useful things. They can say it's apartheid. Even they can say, as I see has been said recently, it's a Jewish supremacist project, Israel, which of course it is. But let's remember that they are not in favor of the liberation of Palestine. They're not in favor of a one-state solution. They're not in favor of dismantling Zionism in the Levant, and indeed Zionism all over the world. They don't believe that it's a fundamentally ineradicably racist system and ideology and indeed movement. And that's the difficulty we have, is that people get confused about that, and they start to think that maybe there are allies there, and they are also pulled. I think people are pulled quite legitimately into thinking that we can collaborate with people because they think we have to broaden the movement. We have to have a wider movement which can be more powerful. But of course, what happens when you ally with those people is that you undermine the movement and you undermine the cutting edge of the movement. And of course, they are engaged in attacking those elements of our movement which are at the cutting edge of our movement. So Palestine Action, as Ronnie's been mentioning, is the cutting edge of the anti-Zionist movement. And we need to make sure that we're not in allying ourselves with other people, allying ourselves with people who will undermine and who are undermining the activities of Palestine Action and of anti-Zionism. And that, of course, is standing together. Yes, it's Yachad. Yes, it's Namod. But it's also the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, to be fair. I mean, they have, as we've seen with leaked documents, which we covered in Palestine Declassified some months ago, they have, in connivance with the BDS National Committee in Ramallah, which of course is run by the Palestinian Authority, they have been trying to undermine and sabotage the activities of Palestine Action. And we should be clear-eyed about that, and we should not be naive and think that because they say a couple of nice things, because they use the word apartheid, that they will be our friends. They will not. Their aim and their method and their objective is to undermine us.
Thank you, David. Ronnie, you've just joined. Do you want to just continue from where you left off, or David was just written? Is Ronnie online? No, I think he's frozen a little bit.
Well,
yeah. Okay, he's gone. All right. Before we just move on, you mentioned Novara Media and how it's also in cahoots with with Standing Together to some extent, which is quite shocking because I think a lot of us do turn to those forms of media right now on YouTube. Actually, Novara Media, it's very popular with my dad, to get the correct information. So how do they manage to put up such a front? I wanted to ask, I was just curious, how do they manage to put up such a front with so pro-Palestinian content, and yet there's still this funding going? Did you say was it funding that they fund Novara Media?
So Novara Media has been funded by the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung from Germany. No, look, I mean, I've been talking about the Zionist movement and about Zionist infiltration, I suppose, is the way I would see it. But we've got to understand that in the force field and the ecosystem of all these organizations, that we also have other organizations involved, other state-linked organizations involved. So, for example, there's an example. The example I mentioned before, an organization called the Balfour Project in Edinburgh, which is not. It doesn't have people in it. Well, there's one or two people on the edges of it who are directly Zionist movement, but the rest of them are more people who are driving it are more connected to the British foreign policy elite. And when I say the British foreign policy elite, that's kind of code for MI6, right? So you've got to think about the role of intelligence agencies in trying to manage and manipulate debates. And that, of course, is part of the function of MI6 and indeed, of course, of the CIA through the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, and indeed through USAID, which, of course, Trump famously squashed the budgets off some months ago, although I think they're now about to, or the NED at least, have had them opened up again. So, and that, of course, is also the case with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is pursuing to some extent the interests, foreign policy interests, i.e., the German intelligence agencies' interests. So you've got to think about it in those kinds of terms as well. So I mean, obviously, Novara is partly in that kind of orbit as well. We've seen over the last 5 or 6, in fact, longer now, years, the role of MI6 in public debate becoming more and more clear with a whole series of leaks, the Integrity Initiative leaks, this organization which was there. Which was funded by MI6, which was overseen by MI6, but which was run by British military intelligence, and which was there to counter Russian propaganda and spent most of its time attacking Jeremy Corbyn. Now, that was I was exposed by a huge leak of documents, and there's been very many more leaks like that on showing the role of MI6. For example, in the Palestinian refugee camps in Beirut, in Syria, in the dirty war in Syria, and the attempt to change the regime in Syria, which of course they've now done, and put their man, the CIA's man, in charge, Giuliani. And so this is all the way through this. That it's not just the Zionist movement; it's also Western intelligence agencies who play secretive, covert, but sometimes exposed roles in managing public debate. And of course, the British intelligence agencies are involved in trying to manage debate on Palestine, as well as it being the case, in my view, that the Zionists have been able to penetrate some elements of the British security state. For example, I would say the police, for example, the fact that all government departments have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which is a Zionist entity foreign policy instrument. So that all of that is an indication of that there are very many powers arraigned against us, and we need to be much more, I think, clued up and less naive about our enemy, because our enemy is not just the people who are making the drones in the Elbit factories. It's not just the IDF, the guys who go from Manchester or Birmingham or Glasgow or London to shoot Palestinian children in the head. It's not just them. It's a whole range of other actors who seem like they're normal people, who seem like they are simply British citizens, but who are actually engaged in trying to subvert our movements. And of course, that involves the police, and it involves the intelligence services, and it involves a whole series of other governmental organizations, and indeed of NGOs, of think tanks, of Zionist family foundations, which fund all this stuff. So that we face quite an array of enemies, to be fair.
Yeah, it's quite scary. It feels a little bit dangerous. And that takes us to our next question, which is, and the following, you just mentioned so you've mentioned generally their links and their ties. Could you elaborate a little bit more on specific parts of their work, and what exactly is it that they are doing that is so dangerous? That we have an understanding now from your and Ronnie's discussion of how they are influencing the general population, but what are there specific examples of what they're doing that is so lethal?
Well, I mean, the reason that this meeting is being held today is because they are about to do a tour around the UK. And Ronnie mentioned lots of examples of the other things they've done. But they're about to do a tour around the UK, saying that there is a grassroots movement in Israel, that's where we should put our efforts, that change can come, that it can be successful. And of course, the purpose of that is to divert attention from the actual work of the Palestine Solidarity movement in the UK. Now, of course, we're at a bit of a crisis point here, because a year and a half into the genocide, the marches aren't going. Marches are required, are necessary. Yes, we have to build collective action. We have to build the sense that people can come together to try and make change, and we have to also continue to demonstrate in order that the people in Palestine can see that they're not abandoned. But the marches themselves are not going to change. They're not going to stop the genocide. We have to stop the genocide. We need to stop the institutions and organizations and individuals who are carrying out the genocide. Now, of course, that's first of all the Zionist entity itself, but also it is the Zionist movement all around the world, and indeed, of course, the governments which are directly involved in pursuing the genocide. The UK government, with its intelligence and arms contracts with Israel, the German government, 30% or so of the weapons comes from Germany, and of course the American government, which provides the green light, the weaponry, the money to conduct genocide day by day by day. So all of these are organizations and institutions which need to be directly targeted and directly interfered with. So it's not just a question of not buying Coca-Cola. It's saying, look, we have to shut down this arms factory. This government department must be stopped from operating. We have to find ways to stop Zionists recruiting individuals outside so-called Israel to go and kill Palestinian children. So there are, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 British citizens who've been involved in this. There are perhaps 8,000 or 9,000 French citizens. Who knows how many American citizens have been called up to commit genocide in Palestine. All of this, these are real people with real addresses who we can try and stop, and that's the most important thing we should be doing. And standing together, of course, wants to interrupt that, wants to say, no, well, no, we have to have a free Israel as well as a free Palestine. Don't say free Palestine. Don't say from the river to the sea. That we can have some kind of serious politics. There is a politics inside Israel. There's not. Israel just has to finish, just has to end. And the whole purpose of standing together is to distract us from that objective.
Yeah. I feel that a lot of what you have said would be taken, and we completely agree with you in that respect, but that can be considered to be incredibly extreme. The whole idea of we must wipe Israel off the face of this earth, sort of approach. But it just does demonstrate how dire the situation has become at this point, that this has just reached a level of ridiculousness that is unacceptable. And you also discussed a little bit on how it matters in the UK. Could you maybe touch on a little more on how practically individuals, like on an individual basis, how we can ensure that we don't fall into the same trap that a lot of us are falling into with regards to, as you mentioned, how this mentality is infiltrating into all of our lives, especially with, I was just looking at the Standing Together website while you were talking, and I find it very interesting that it's both in Hebrew and in Arabic, like we stand together. And I'm just very curious how they've managed to get Palestinians onto their side and Arabs onto their side, and people who are subjected to all this humiliation. How are they managing to catch so many people and bring them in and make this organization? So sorry, lots of questions altogether, but specifically how we can act to ensure that we don't fall into the trap, and how are they managing to bring people in?
Well, I mean, the answer to the last part of your question is a single word. It's collaborators. There are collaborators in every conflict. There are collaborators, and sometimes they become collaborators out of desperate circumstances, from threats, from blackmail, etc. That's what the whole purpose of this of the surveillance that the IDF carries out on Palestinian territories is to find compromise on Palestinians, which they can use to make them work as collaborators. Now, some, of course, of that is covert collaboration, and in other cases, it's overt collaboration. People who come out publicly and say that they support key elements of the Zionist narrative, or that they want to work with Israelis, or whatever it is. Now, there were collaborators in France with the Nazis. In fact, the government of France, the Vichy government, were a collaborationist government. There were those in the French resistance who became informers. There were those in the Irish Republican struggle who were informers. And indeed, of course, that's the case also in other struggles, in Algeria, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in every colonial struggle, there are collaborators. And of course, the question is how you deal with that. And that's a difficult question, but it's not surprising really that there are collaborators in the Palestinian question, in the Palestinian struggle. That it's the same with every other struggle. The Palestinian Authority is a quisling authority. Let's not forget that it's a collaborationist authority, and that's why, of course, the BDS National Committee, which is run from Ramallah, has issued statements condemning armed resistance. That of course was famously done about a year and a half ago, and they've issued statements condemning armed resistance. They, in response, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine condemned that. They also issued statements condemning the mapping project, a Boston-based Palestine solidarity activity, mapping Zionist infiltration in Massachusetts and Boston, and they also, of course, have condemned and criticised Palestine Action, and called for people not to support Palestine Action. And that, of course, is why the PSC has been like that. So what I would say here is that this is not, we shouldn't look just at the question of collaboration and the PSC's effective collaboration with the collaborators of the Palestinian Authority, because what's going on here is that the power in this relationship are the Zionists. The Zionists are the ones who are forcing, let's put it that way, people to collaborate, and that's what the Palestinian Authority are, and that essentially is what's happening with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, so that they present as being an anti-Zionist organization. If you look on their website, they say, we are an anti-Zionist organization. But actually, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign is well, it's a betrayer of the liberation of Palestine, is what I would say. These are big things which we hadn't perhaps realized at the beginning of the genocide, but the genocide has made everything clear in terms of who's on what side and who is there to collaborate with the enemy, and who will accept collaboration with the enemy, who will undermine what obviously requires to happen. You said it seems very extreme. It might seem very extreme to call for the ending of the Zionist entity, but look, if you want peace in the Middle East, there is no other alternative. There will never be peace while you have a Jewish state in the Levant, whether it's smaller than it currently is or larger. Of course, they want to make it larger, and they've become larger in recent months with their occupations of parts of Lebanon and Syria. And of course, they want to make those occupations larger and larger, and they want to use those states in the Levant which surround them as pawns and as assets and allies to finally accomplish the full execution and murder of the Palestinians, and if not, then the removal of them from Palestine. So that's the agenda here. If we want there to be that to stop, and we want there to be peace in the Middle East, there cannot be a Jewish state in the Middle East, because it will always be imperialist, it will always be genocidal, and the quicker it's extinguished, the better, in my view.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much, David. Ronnie, you're back, thankfully. So we were what I think the two final questions have kind of been combined. So the first question was, what exactly is so lethal about standing together? We understand that they are manipulating and they are controlling, but what specifically is lethal about them, and why does this matter so much in the UK, were the questions, and then we kind of went somewhere else. So if you could just give your wonderful insight on that.
Yeah, so apologies to the audience that I kept disappearing, and it only happened on Zoom. It has nothing to do with the internet. Something very strange. Okay, let's hope. Standing together. Just recently, they had an interview with Christiana Manpour on CNN. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it. Maybe we can play it now, and then I will respond to it.
Yeah, thank you. I think they are saying they've managed to set it up, so let's see if it works now.
Normalizing the occupation, the BDS movement, have said that, again, normalizing things. They don't want you to have this reach out to try to figure out how to come to some solution.
Yeah, I think when you sit in the comfort of your home in the US or in Europe, it's much easier
These are Palestinians.
to look at us, what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and to think that we are just, one page or blanket. To do not understand the realities that we live is sometimes it can be out of ignorance. But my reality that I am born into, I am a Palestinian citizen of Israel. I'm part of the 20% Palestinians who stayed inside of the borders
and for whom
of Israel.
life is not that easy.
It is not that easy. We are a second-class citizens. In 2018, the Israeli government has put a law, the nation-state law, that declares that we are, as non-Jews, second-class citizens. We are persecuted each and every day, especially after the 7th of October, if we speak anything about Gaza. So to come and to boycott the only people and the only activists, both Jews and Palestinians, who would dare to stand up against this government, to speak a different language, to say that this occupation must end, this war must end, a deal must be put on the table so the hostages can also come back home. It is just to go against the will of people. If you are true revolutionary, you understand that you have people who suffer and you have governments. Okay, and this is how we do it. We organize and we mobilize people and we talk within our people inside of our society.
So I think that you can tell. First of all, he's saying, we are being boycotted. Actually, they themselves and her party, Fadash party, is opposed to the BDS campaign. So it's kind of saying why are you boycotting us? We are doing something. Actually, they are so back in their, like, kind of so not advanced in their political understanding that they are not even, in line with the BDS campaign, which is the bare minimum, which is like, really, before talking about BDS, we cannot even start having a discussion. Okay, it's like the bare minimum, the bare, rights that are protected by international law and human rights conventions. It's basically just about not aiding and abetting in crime. So they are not even there. They are promoting the discourse of lies about two states. Two states is the only way to understand two states, according to the Zionist version of two states, is a way to normalize and perpetuate apartheid. Okay, this is why the Zionists, the liberal Zionists, those that are their allies, they need to have two states. And I can quote to you some people like Ami Ayalon, for example, who is regarded for some reason leftist or a peacenik. He says, we need to have a Palestinian state because this is existential for us. Because otherwise we cannot have what he calls Jewish and democratic state. He says, we need to have a Palestinian state so that as many of them will be on the other side of the border. It is not, he says, it is not because we like them. It is not because they deserve it. It is existential for us. And then he carries on and he says, the whole issue of not having a Palestinian partner is not even relevant. He goes on and explains, I can explain how we can achieve a Palestinian state without a Palestinian partner, and we have enough military power to do this. They will force a Palestinian state on the Palestinians just in order to have as many of them over there and as few of them with them, and then they can claim that they are a democracy. So this is kind of one way to look at two states, but I'm just saying that promoting two states, especially these days, when everyone in the world understands that the two-state model, which was never a solution, ever, is not even viable and it's not even relevant. They still promote that. They still only point the finger at the minor occupation and so on. They don't even say a word about genocide, not one single word about genocide. It's quite amazing. At the same time, they published some statement and they called for a demonstration, for example, to oppose the war. And they said, we refuse the war. And immediately they published kind of like a clarification saying, we did not call for the soldiers to refuse the war. Kind of, this is the civil society refusal. So they are very, very cautious about even taking that minor step of saying, do not participate in the war as soldiers. Because they are catering to this Zionist society, the liberal Zionist society, that is only concerned about the hostages. What they call the hostages are I don't know how many of them are in Gaza right now, the Israeli hostages. Many of them, by the way, are not hostages, they're prisoners of war. They're soldiers. But let's say 20, 50, 200, doesn't matter, out of 2.3 million hostages that are in Gaza. These are the people of Gaza plus the 10,000 who are languishing in dungeons, in Israeli dungeons, which are called prison. All of those are hostages. But the Zionists, including Standing Together, are only concerned about the handful of Israeli hostages. They're only concerned about ending the hostilities. As I said, as Martin Luther King said, it's about having the absence of tension, not the presence of justice. What we are seeking is the presence of justice.
Okay. Yeah, I really like how you frame the whole idea of the two-state solution. I've never heard anyone say it like this before, that it just shows that there cannot be a Jewish democratic state, because the whole point of having a separate Palestinian state is not, as is expounded, for their own self-determination, but rather you yourself cannot have a democratic state, which is the reason why you need this other entity.
Yes,
But
maybe we should explain a little bit about that. First of all, Zionism, the Zionist project in Palestine. Some people have some ideas about Zionism in the past, that as if there was something legitimate about Zionism in the past. We'll put that aside. Zionism in 1948 converged into one. If there was a superposition of states or conditions for Zionism, in 1948 it converged into one distinct version. So anyone who was a Zionist in 1947, if you remember the Zionist in 1949, that is already a problem. And that distinct form of Zionism is all about exclusivity, is all about creating a state for us and only for us, at the expense of all the others. And the only way to achieve that, there are the only two ways to achieve that, are either by ethnically cleansing the land or by genocide. That's it. I don't know of a third option. Either you drive away the indigenous people from the land in order to have your exclusive state at their expense, or you just kill them all. So genocide was not as popular in 1948 when the Zionists established their state. So they went for the second best option as far as they were concerned, which was ethnic cleansing. They didn't manage to expel everyone. And many Zionists to this day say that this is the greatest mistake. And now they're finishing the job that they haven't finished in 1948. But the other thing to understand is that genocide was always in the cards. It was always part of the plan. Maybe they will implement it, maybe they will not. Now, the genocide that we are seeing is just the next step in that Zionist project, in the way that it is playing out. But it was always founded as an exclusive state for one and only one type of people. So how can these people, these liberal Zionists, claim that they are democratic? They have to make sure that those who have been expelled will never be allowed to come back. Those who are still on the land will be ghettoized and held in all kinds of different bantustans and so on. Even those who are regarded as citizens by law, their vote means absolutely nothing. By law, you cannot run for elections in the Israeli parliament, the Israeli Knesset, if you demand the democratization of the place. If you oppose the racial domination of that place, or in the law, basic law of the Knesset, Article 7a, says that a party cannot run for election and a party, a representative cannot run for elections if they negate Israel as a quote unquote Jewish and democratic state. And the only way to understand the combination of Jewish and democratic in the Zionist sense is Zionist and apartheid. Replace Jewish with Zionist, democratic with apartheid, and then you'll understand what they mean. And it's not only me saying it. This was taken to the Supreme Court because it was challenged, and the Supreme Court gave that interpretation that this is when they say the Jewish character of the state, what I was challenging the terminology earlier with David, when they say the Israeli court says Jewish character of the state, they mean the racial supremacist character of the state. They said it in their own words. Or the demographic character, if you wish to put it in a little bit of a softer language.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is quite a lot. So we're going to start wrapping up this discussion section. We're going to move on to the Q&A, and I'm going to hand it over to one of the organizers for that. But before we end, I asked David this question already, Ronnie, when you were gone, so I'll ask you. So the question is, why does it matter in the UK specifically? How can we on an individual level combat this threat, essentially? If you could just say it in a few minutes.
Yes. So what I've noticed, I was approached by friends in the UK. What do you think about standing together? And I said, okay, let me put something together. And I came up with a whole list of arguments and data that I found online. So it seems like there is a concerted effort to kind of take over the Palestine discourse across the world, basically. I've seen them operating from Australia to North America, okay, and anywhere in Europe, including the UK, and they have been very active apparently, and they are kind of trying to take over the pro-Palestine discourse. They have people, by the way, that are Palestinian who are coming to speak on their behalf, friends of the Stand Together, etc. But these people are basically working for as hasbara agents, as propaganda agents for Zionism. I mean, they are like these two people that I can mention, Ibrahim Abu Ahmad and Amira Muhammad. They are working for a liberal Zionist think tank, whose entire mission is liberal Zionism, and with very specific goals about where they stand. Which is kind of on the board. You have former Israeli ambassadors and things like that. And these are the people who come to speak as the Palestinian voice on these events organized by Standing Together. This should be a serious alarm bell. Okay, so maybe you could say that these people are not directly, they are not standing together per se, but they are being invited by all kinds of Standing Together around the world. These basically people who do Hasbara. They happen to be Palestinian, but they still do Hasbara. It happens. Okay, so that is one very concerning thing in itself. Secondly, it's obviously the false discourse of equating the two sides, of saying, like, I even mentioned the basic stuff of challenging the quote Free Palestine, the chant Free Palestine. Okay, because this is too controversial because you have Palestine and Israel. by the way, I would say the opposite. The very notion of Palestine and Israel is the greatest success of Zionist propaganda. There is no Palestine in Israel. Israel and Palestine are the same spot of land. You can call it one or the other. One exists at the expense of the other, but to have this notion as if there is an Israel and a Palestine is a very, very dangerous discourse. So we have to reject that, and we really have to be cautious about this type of language that is being promoted. And there are many other examples, and I can name names, I can give you certain scenarios, but you could see that they have quite a bit of kind of, they reach quite far with their language, with their discourse. And wherever you go, wherever you check the language, you will see that this is a language. I mean, I didn't have time to analyze what Rula answered Christiana Manpour, but basically she didn't only challenge the notion of, oh, why are you boycotting us, etc. You should support the peace-loving Israelis, etc. But there was more than that I'm not sure that we have time to go into. But I mean, basically, she kind of framed it as if this is the only option to oppose the current situation, what they are doing. And they are doing little to nothing about opposing the current situation. There are other people, there are other groups who are actually doing things. Inside Palestine, there are different groups. Mostly Palestinians who are being silenced because they're obviously anti-Zionist, and it is very difficult to take action when you are under the boot of Zionism. And obviously people are around the world. You know that. You are part of that. The listeners are part of that. So there are the millions of us, even billions of us around the world, who are standing up for Palestine, who are doing different things. I would challenge the whole chant of ceasefire now, ceasefire now. It rings nice, but it doesn't mean anything. I would challenge that and say you should do something that's more practical, or at least have a clear demand. Ceasefire now is no demand at all. You need to have a clear demand. You need to demand that your country, your representatives are not criminals themselves. They don't participate in crime. You can go and take, at the very least, do some sort of civil disobedience. I would say that the time for civil disobedience is over. Now is the time for direct action, especially given the genocide that's being aired on every screen. And then choose what it is that you can offer. What is our little part, each and one of us, that we can do in order to basically bring at least to a halt this genocide, if not abolish the entire system altogether. But they are not doing any of that. They are just doing kind of this some soothing practice in order to avert actually taking action.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ronnie. That was a very enlightening discussion. I learned a lot today. I kind of went in with barely any knowledge, and I've come out with loads. Hi, David. I see you're back now after a bit. So thank you so much for all that information and all those insights. I'm now going to hand over to one of the organizers to continue on to the Q&A session. But it has been an honor to speak to both of you, David and Ronnie. I'm doing my master's at Bristol, and I recently wrote an essay on international law and armed conflict, focusing on Israel and Gaza. So that was quite interesting, and this has been just added to that experience. So thank you so much, and hopefully the questions are interesting. So yeah, I'm going to drop off there. I'm going to hand it over now.
Can you hear me? Bahira, thank you so much. You've been incredible. Thank you so much. Okay, so we do have a few questions. We'll start on one in the UK. We've just been talking about the UK. So what, in your opinion, is the reason for standing together, wanting to become affiliated with the Trade Council movement and the TUC here in the UK? Do you want to take that one, David?
No, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, they're presenting themselves as being a movement. They want to infiltrate the trade union movement. They want to become part of that nexus of organizations, which is strongly involved in the big demos that happen in London. It's an infiltration tactic. It's it's time honored. That's what they do. And of course, the Trades Council movement is an area where the Zionists currently have not very much support. So it's an attempt to, as Ronnie's been saying, to turn that around.
Ronnie, I guess this one would be for you. Is it true that NGOs based in Israel have to be registered, i.e., they have to show they are pro-Israel, and if they aren't, are they then prescribed by Israel as a terrorist group?
I don't think that they do have to be registered. I don't think they have to show that they are pro-Israel. What they do have to show these days is where they get their funding from, if it's foreign funding. Like, for example, I mentioned the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and so on, because this is regarded as some sort of external influence and not liked by the state. Anyway, but I don't think it's that difficult for an Israeli NGO to operate. The one thing that people don't know about is the strong censorship that exists in Israel. You know that Israel claims to be a democracy, even though it doesn't have an iota of democracy there. But what they do have a lot is censorship, military censorship, which is the state censor. And let's put it this way, every news outlet, every newscast in the evening has a member of the Israeli censor sitting there at 6 o'clock to go through the lineup and before the 8 o'clock news. Okay, this is kind of the level of censorship that we are talking about. But what happens with Israeli media and also these organizations, many of them, is actually an act of self-censorship. It doesn't even reach the level of the Israeli censor because they are all about censoring themselves because they are kind of aligned politically anyway. So long story short, I don't think that it is illegal so far, it's not illegal for these organizations who may be critical somewhat of Israeli policies to operate. But they also don't really challenge much the system, not the Israeli organization.
Okay, thank you. This one is directed for both of you. So what do you, David and Ronnie, know about Standing Together's operation specifically here in the UK? And how much is Alliance for Workers' Liberty, AWL, involved, and how?
So I don't know about AWL's work. What I know is only about the organizing that I've seen, all Friends of Standing Together, and they've been quite active. I know that these people that I mentioned, the Hasbara agents, Amira and Ibrahim, they were there on behalf of Stand Together several times over the past years, invited multiple times. I know that Stand Together also had meetings at the House of Commons, etc. So they have been very active and across the UK, including Bristol. So this is a reason for concern at the very least. The level of attention that they get because, as I said, their discourse is sinister. It has nothing to do with being pro-Palestinian. And do not be fooled just by their claim that they are somehow respecting some Palestinian rights. No, actually, it's quite the opposite. Yeah, I mean, you have all these so-called peace organizations in Israel. We just talked about Israeli NGOs a moment ago. All these horrible, horrible peace organizations, Peace Now and all the others, they are all supremacists. They're all about maintaining racial supremacy in this version or the other. And anyone, as I mentioned before, anyone who promotes the two-state discourse is already doing that because they are concerned about demography. I don't want demography, I want democracy. And if you want democracy, you have to totally abolish the whole demographic line of thinking and demand the rights of all. And demanding the rights of all necessarily means abolishing Zionism. There's no other way about it. There are 21 million, at least 21 million stakeholders in that sense, at least 14 million Palestinians and 7 million among the privileged group that I belong to. And all of these people need to have full rights.
Yeah, so I mean, so I wasn't aware of the connection with the AWL. I've just looked it up. Yes, the AWL are huge supporters of Standing Together, as you might expect, and of course they are themselves, of course, not in favour of BDS. If you look at the article in defence of Standing Together, I'll read you the last paragraph. Progress is only possible on the basis of a framework that guarantees equal rights to both peoples, Israeli and Palestinian, including an equal right to national self-determination via two independent states. Normal Jewish and Arab workers uniting to demand freedom and equality for both peoples should have our solidarity. Any group or tactic that pushes against this, i.e. for BDS or for the ending of Zionism, is a dead end for solidarity with the Palestinians. So the AWL typically has a kind of workerist position, which says that workers should hold hands across the sectarian or ethnic divides in a settler colonial situation, and fails to recognise the fact and thought that we could resolve the question of British imperialism in Ireland by Protestant and Catholic workers holding hands, linking pinks and being nice to each other. We couldn't do it then, and we can't do it now in Palestine. It's ridiculous. And of course, the AWL is a very negative organisation on the British left. Having just looked at this, I imagine that the people who were giving out the Standing Together leaflets on the Bristol demonstrations were probably AWL members. I've seen them on demonstrations before, pretending to be in solidarity with the Palestinians, but actually being very much there to undermine the possibility of Palestinian liberation.
Thank you. Right, Ronnie, I'm going to address this one to you first, but David, I have a feeling that you might want to chime in on this one as well. So let's all take a deep breath. So quite a lot of focus in this webinar on New Israel Fund, but I really would love to hear more about whether the Palestinian people have progressive options for engagement and organizing with one another on the ground without resorting to Hamas or terrorism.
Yeah. First of all, when you talk about terrorism, every aspect of what the Zionist, or let's say the Israeli army does is terrorism, okay? And not from today and not from the 7th of October. Everything about Israeli policy is terrorism towards Palestinians. Just if you go according to the definition of terrorism, even the US definition of terrorism. So that's one thing. The other is what options the Palestinians have. There are different options. I would argue that Stand Together shouldn't be one of them. Because this is basically being Uncle Tom's, okay? I mean, it's basically about lending legitimacy to everything that's wrong about Zionist policies. And, you know, as I said, with a nice cover, with a nice packaging. I forgot to mention a few things, and I will also address the question. I forgot to mention a few things. When I mentioned Tzipi Livni, who does not have a direct tie, but an indirect tie to Standing Together, and she is currently on the board of Elbit. I forgot to mention another person. Just recently, just a week ago or so, there was the People's Peace Summit organized by Standing Together in Jerusalem, in occupied Jerusalem. It was a massive event with a whole cadre of Israeli normalizers. I can name names, doesn't matter, but there was a whole long list of normalizers and so on. And there was also one of them was Yuri Tamir, who was speaking there, you know, giving a speech. Yuri Tamir, who again is regarded as this liberal Zionist politician and so on. She was also a board member of Elbit until a couple of years ago. You know, these are the kind of people. They're not. I mean, these so-called peace, and Yuri Tamir is regarded as a leftist, even almost a far left in Israeli discourse. But these people at the same time that they're regarded as leftists in Israel, and supposedly not as bad as Netanyahu, and supposedly against the occupation of 67, they are at the same time doing the worst things, like, for example, being on the board of Elbit System. It's the same people. So we have to put that in context. Now, having said all of that, Palestinians, progressive Palestinians, of course. I mean, look, when we have, I am part of also one-state groups, okay, discussing the future about a shared space, a shared land for everyone. When Palestinians who are currently under the boot of Zionism, who are oppressed and subjugated, come to the privileged folks at the moment and tell them, we're willing to live alongside with you, but as equals. Don't ask for anything more than that. You will not have your privilege. You will just have equal rights, and we will all be treated equally, and all minorities will be protected, and we will have a multicultural society. That is a very, very progressive notion. I mean, it is the most progressive notion in a way. Okay, and there are many people like that. I mean, until the genocide and post-genocide, I don't know what will happen. Post-genocide, it's a bit like, you know, not a bit. It's exactly like, okay, my grandparents who barely survived the Holocaust. My grandmother was in Auschwitz, my grandfather in Dachau, and so on. The entire family, most of the family has perished. And they went to live back in wherever in Eastern Europe that they were living originally, alongside their neighbors, many of them were allied with the Nazis. How did that feel? Was that even a possibility? This is the type of thinking right now about post-genocide. And post-genocide feels different than before in terms of living together. It will take, I don't know what it will take, but there will need to be a lot of work for us to be able to envision the living together, the former Nazis and their victims together on that land. But I still believe in it.
Cheers. Anything to add, David?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to believe in it, isn't it, Ronnie? I mean, that's the thing. It's difficult.
It is.
But I mean, what I would say is, look, progressive politics in the way conceived of in this country in the last 100 years is not going to liberate Palestine. Palestine will be liberated by military force. And that's the only way to defeat the Zionists, is militarily to defeat them. And so, of course, Hamas and indeed Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and all the other armed organizations which are currently engaged in armed struggle in Gaza and indeed in the West Bank, including, of course, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, which, of course, used to be associated, still are sort of associated with Fatah, with the Palestinian Authority, but they're engaged in joint operations with the Palestinian resistance. All of these organizations will be at the forefront and the cutting edge of liberating Palestine. And also, I would imagine that they will be joined, and they're already being joined by other military actors. And Sarallah is obviously one of them, and the Islamic Republic of Iran has shown that it might be another one of them. It, of course, launched those two operations against the Zionist entity. So that's who will make progressive politics in Palestine. It's the military force of the resistance, and there is no other option. I'm sorry, that's not, it's not kind of, will we vote Lib Dem or will we vote Labour? But that is the reality of the politics of the situation. And you cannot have progressive politics without the destruction of the Zionist entity. The condition of progressive politics in the Levant is the destruction of the Zionist entity. So that's what I would say about that. I mean, terrorism is just eyewash, right? I mean, it's a term dreamt up in order to describe the political violence of your opponents as being illegitimate, while miraculously screening out the political violence of the oppressors, the British Army or the American military or the so-called IDF or whatever. I mean, let's not be talking about terrorism. It's a ridiculous term.
Yes. Maybe one more word about the situation in Gaza. First of all, what happened on 7th of October is what I refer to as the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. And we have to understand in that context. Before that, there was the March of Return in 2018. It was on Passover Eve. They started the March of Return. On Passover Eve, 75 years earlier, there was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising that started symbolically on the same day. Okay, so when the Palestinians did not use weapons, when they went to the fence to demand their basic right to return home, it wasn't just about the siege, as some organizations would like to portray it. It wasn't about only about the criminal and barbaric siege. It was also about their fundamental right to return home, just across the fence. They were shot down by snipers, hundreds of them. This is what happened to this population, where there is no potable water in Gaza. Israel controls everything to the extent of counting the calories, the caloric intake of the people in Gaza. This is all documented. And yet, when they tried something that is regarded as progressive, nonviolent, etc., they were literally shot down. And so what else? What is there to expect other than them trying to break out of that concentration camp? It is totally legitimate morally, legitimate under the law, and this is how we should look at it.
Perfect, thank you. So there we're coming to an end, but there are a couple more questions. But I just wondered, Ronnie, if you could, you said earlier that you had all these names. I wondered if you could pop a couple of the names in the chat, just so that we can maybe do some of our own research. We can start connecting our own dots. And
Yes.
thank
Yes, of
you.
course. Actually, I'll write down maybe a link to something that where I collected some material. It's not. It's just kind of the highlights. Okay, some material about staying together and so on, and you can carry on with your own research. Um, I will also mention that when we still talk about Hamas and so on, um, there is this Alon the Green, who is like the founder, one of the co-founders of Stand Together and the main figure there. He responded, where is it quickly? Anyway, someone was criticizing him. Some right-wing Israeli was criticizing him, and so Alon in response told him, "You are worse than Hamas. You are a Jewish Hamas." This was his response. Okay, don't talk about Hamas. You are the most Hamas of them all. You are a Jewish Hamas. I mean, this is how. So he uses kind of Hamas in a very kind of as a in a derogatory and whatever term. Yeah, I mean, I am respecting anyone who is resisting this horrible system of oppression, um, and I think that they have every legitimacy also to resist.
Okay, so looking at their website, I cannot see any reference to supporting a two-state solution. They tell me they oppose BDS because the economic impact would strengthen their enemies in the Zionist far right. Is it not possible to disagree with them on BDS, but support their activism in a very hostile climate, while at the same time working through PSC, Friends of Al-Aqsa, etc., to pressure our own regime to impose BDS and de-recognize Israel as long as it exists as an apartheid entity?
Well, but there people do oppose BDS. They're on record. It's very clear. And as I said, BDS is like a no-brainer. Some of their people are politicians. I mean, you have with the Hadash party, etc. But even the ones who are not politicians, I mean, they are very clear about where they stand in that regard, in regard with the opposition to BDS. And there is a reason why the BDS movement has called them out as normalizers and those who speak basically for the apartheid state. So I mean, it's all in the documentation and so on. I can supply more evidence for that.
Finally, then, this is so coming away from standing together a little bit, but can you say more about the PSC, the PLO, and PAL Action?
I know that David spoke about PSC, etc. before. I don't know exactly because unfortunately I was being cut off several times. I think that the PSC is lacking in their political stance, to put it mildly. I know that those PSC branches who are, let's say, supportive of Palestine Action and other groups have been kind of reprimanded, and but they are doing their thing. They tell the PSC headquarters, I mean, if you don't want us, that's fine. I mean, we are independent. We do our thing. We are doing you a favor that we are still called PSC, whatever, PSC Manchester, PSC Bristol, etc. So this is kind of the politics of PSC, and David, I'm sure we talked about it much, so I don't have to repeat that. Is problematic. At the same time, okay, I mean, people have to evaluate where they stand. As far as the issue with Palestine Action, I think the Palestine Action is kind of showing a way to, where we literally we go to the source, we challenge the very manufacturing of weapons. We do something that I feel is also absolutely not only legitimate but also legal, and we are challenging that in court. Obviously, the authorities are trying to change the laws in order to put people like us in prison rather than the actual criminals who are both in government and those arms manufacturers. And it is, I think that, yeah, Palestine Action is kind of showing the way of something that is effective, we have managed over the past 4 years or so of the activities of Palestine Action, we have managed to close 3 of the 10 operating Elbit sites in the UK, permanently shut them down. Other organizations, other companies, etc., have also distanced themselves from Elbit and other arms manufacturers because of these actions. So this is showing that it is possible to act against these very, very strong forces. These strong forces that are not only politically backed, but also we know there's proof now that actually even the CPS has been, the Crown Prosecution has been collaborating with, communicating with the Israeli embassy regarding Palestinian action and going after activists and so on. So the collusion is on so many levels. It's not only the politics, it's again the entire system that is working against us, and still we manage, more and more people join, we manage to take effective activity against these criminals. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. Okay, I took part in an action. We managed to cause some damage to our system. My only regret about that action is not the time that I was in prison or under house arrest, etc. My only regret is that it wasn't enough to avert the genocide that we're seeing at the moment. So we really, each one of us has to ask ourselves, what can we do? What is the best course of action to take effective action? And effective action is more than demonstrating, but demonstrating in the streets is important. And it doesn't mean that we each have to put our liberty on the line, but we can each do something. Okay, when I was under house arrest in the UK, there was a wonderful person who opened her doors to me, to a complete stranger, and had me in for a whole year. And we are like family now. And each person can participate in this way or another in order to take some sort of an effective measure against the most horrible crimes that we're seeing right now.
But we have just had another question come in. So if we're campaigning to end UK military support for the genocide, is there any space to work with groups that do not endorse decolonization of Israel and the liberation of Palestine?
Well, I mean, I think that it depends what you're working on, right? But if the groups that you're talking about, like Standing Together, for example, are actually actively trying to undermine the possibility either of BDS, which in itself is quite a mild thing, or of anti-Zionism, or of a more radical action, well, then they are the enemy. They're part of the enemy's armory, and we should understand that. And so, what would be the point of working with liberal Zionist organizations who are simply going to start to tone police your activity, and they're going to exact a price? I mean, this is the history which people on the left in the UK, I think, are not really aware of. There's always a price in working with Zionists. And that this goes back all the way to the 1940s in the anti-racist movement. If you work with Zionists, the price will always be that you have to soft pedal the fact that Zionism is racism, and that you have to make sure that you think about the feelings of Zionists, that you don't upset Zionists. And so they want to begin to tone police you. They want to intervene in your strategy and your strategic work, and that will mean compromise and it will mean ineffectiveness. They are there to undermine the possibility of effectiveness of our campaigns. And so why would you work with the enemy? They are the enemy.
Yeah. Thank you. Ronnie, do you want to add anything?
I think that it is really should be quite straightforward. Okay, not supplying weapons to Israel is not a big ask. The demands are so clear on what the UK is allowed and not allowed to do, and the UK, we know how complicit the government is in all of that. So I really don't think that it is such a minimal kind of demand, and we cannot ask for anything less than that. So, and David mentioned that they are trying to kind of with kind of like the softer discourse. Yeah, they want us to backpedal even on those very, very basic demands, and we cannot do that.
So I just want to say thank you so much. I mean, that's a lot to think about tonight, and loads of information. Thank you so much for your time, both of you, and for enlightening us all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.